I don't want to do this episode. You don't want to hear this episode. Can we just agree to not have this episode? No. Morning to you. Good Tuesday morning. I'm Dejan Kovacevic of DK Pittsburgh Sports. This is a highly reluctant episode of Daily Shot of Steelers. Comes your way bright and early every weekday. If you're into hockey and or baseball, I also offer daily shots of Penguins and Pirates that I hope you'll also check out. Cam Sutton suspended for 8 games by the NFL yesterday. And the statement that came out from the league didn't get into any kind of specifics. It just said for violating the NFL's personal conduct policy, he'll be eligible to return on October 29 after the Steelers' Week 8 game against the Giants. For anyone who doesn't know, and in the interest of being complete here, Sutton was entered into a pretrial diversion program back in April to resolve a domestic violence case. According to court records, he had been charged with misdemeanor battery after he turned himself into the Hillsborough County Sheriff's Office, that's in Florida, at the end of March after being wanted for weeks by the police. Nothing came of that. Like, not a thing. And that's the reason that both at the time and when I first broached the possibility that Sutton could be returning to the Steelers, because I know how tight they are, meaning Sutton and the people who run the team, and of course the head coach of the team. And sure enough, that ended up happening. And even then, I said I'm going to keep my opinions about this to myself until we'd seen some sort of investigation. The police obviously didn't do one. The police just were waiting for charges to be pressed or not pressed. Charges weren't pressed, and that's the end of that. The NFL was always going to do an investigation. I believe that the Steelers also were going to do their own diligence, but they were never going to be the arbiter here. It was always going to be the league, very similar to the Ben Roethlisberger case. Those charges were dropped, but the league proceeded anyway. Why is that? For anybody who thinks of this as double jeopardy or whatever, it's because the NFL is an entity. It's a company. It's a privilege to be in the league. You don't have to be in the league. They can throw you out of the league because they don't want you in the league. So they can do whatever they want as the employer, or in this case, as the entity that governs the employers, all 32 of them. So the investigation happens, and what's left in its wake is that Sutton was determined to have violated the personal conduct policy. Again, that's all the announcement says. There's no specifics. There's no he did this, he did that. However, let's go back to the really grotesque allegations of domestic violence in which Sutton was accused of all kinds of awful things in the altercation, not least of which was a chokehold or strangulation in some form of the woman in his life. And I'm leaving her unnamed out of respect. And it's stomach turning. It's however it was that you felt the first time you heard about it, the first time you read about it, back when the Lions decided like that to release him. Now, the Lions could have had their own motivation. He had a 3-year, $39 million contract. And the first year that didn't go particularly well. So the Lions might have just said, well, here's our excuse to cut this guy. But then he just stays out there. He's a free agent in the freest sense of the term, because nobody wanted him. Nobody was going to touch him with a 10-foot pole. And he makes his way back to the Steelers. And I said then, I'll reserve judgment until we see what the NFL comes up with. My friends, when you suspend somebody for 8 games and you're the NFL and you have this league's history of shrugging off domestic violence or man-on-woman violence to the extreme that Ray Rice got 2 games for that caught-on-video assault of his a few years back, and you give out 8 games, you give out half the season, it is impossible for me to separate that from those allegations. It's impossible for me to say, well, yeah, maybe it wasn't as bad as those allegations and they found some middle. No, they came with 8 games. They came with half a season. For this league, that's a lot. It takes a lot. What's more, you know and I know there's not going to be any appeal. Not by Sutton, not by the team, because there's no way the team would have agreed to sign Sutton if Sutton hadn't told him in advance he's not going to put up a fight. No matter what it is that the league says, he's not going to put up a fight. I'll bet you anything he won't. In the time since this suspension was announced, I've seen, heard, and read a lot of people talking about the football implications of this. I'm not in the solar system of discussing that, not yet. I am infinitely more interested to hear what both Omar Khan and Mike Tomlin have to say about this. This won't be like the last time it was brought up with Tomlin when Sutton came to minicamp. Now, the suspension's in play. The league has declared that Sutton was guilty of something. And none of this looks good for the Pittsburgh Steelers. When we come back, J1Q.
This segment of Daily Shot is brought to you by our good friends at Mike's Beer Bar. They're located on Federal Street, directly across from PNC Park. Mike has more than 500 beers on tap, including from more than 50 local breweries. Stop in and say hello. Tell Mike we sent you. Mike's Beer Bar.
Today's J1Q, or as he puts it here, serious question, DK, comes from Bill, who says, do we really believe that a return to the 1970s is going to win in today's NFL? Bill, of course, is referring to yesterday's episode in which I kind of advocated for the simplest, crudest possible offense, at least in the first 4 to 6 weeks of the upcoming season. The better for Russell Wilson to become acclimated to the offense, the better for the offense to become acclimated to Wilson, and the better for the offensive line specifically to become acclimated to the NFL, with 2 of them likely being rookies. My view on the Steelers of the 1970s is that it tends to be overstated how much they relied on the run. Let's remember that Terry Bradshaw won 2 of the 4 Super Bowl MVPs. And let's remember that along the way, some of the most impactful plays were made by Lynn Swann, John Stallworth. So not everything was 2 yards in a cloud of dust. Now, of course, the running game was more prevalent in the sport at all levels back then than it is now. But one of the things to keep in mind, and I did mention this yesterday, Bill, I don't know that I placed a big enough emphasis on it, so I'm going to reiterate it today, but in stronger terms. It's not just about turning around and handing off to Najee Harris and Jaylen Warren. That's not what I was saying. If you listened between some of the lines, I was pushing for throwing the ball to those guys and just executing safe plays. I mentioned throwing across the middle to Pat Freiermuth, but doing it in a safe way. I don't want to see the 49ers schemes, is what I'm saying, in the first 4 to 6 weeks. I want to see things be as elementary as possible for all concerned. That's going to allow this offense to develop some confidence, to grow into the next level of what they want to be. But you know what? As long as you're at it, win some football games. So when I say that I want to see them go pull, the whole way down the field, or even just getting to the other team's 48-yard line and punting or whatever, and you're eating up some clock and buying some time for your defensive guys to get a blow. There's more to it. I just want to see it not be something that requires some raging Bill Walsh level intellect to understand. I'm quite confident that will not work in this circumstance. I appreciate the question. I appreciate everybody listening to Daily Shot of Steelers, including potentially when we might not agree on something. I'm not ready to get into Sutton or who's going to take his place. I don't like this. I don't like it at all. We're going to have another one of these episodes tomorrow.